Ever wonder what it's like to swim in the darkest, tightest spots on Earth? I'm about to take you on a wild ride through the world of cave diving. These underwater tunnels are so tricky, some divers never come back. Strap on your imaginary scuba gear as we explore the scariest caves you've ever heard of. Welcome to On the Edge, where tragic caving stories unfold and explore what went wrong. Let's dive in. Jacob's Well in Texas looks like a beautiful, inviting swimming hole. But beneath its crystal-clear surface lies a deadly maze of underwater caves that's claimed the lives of at least 8 divers. This is the story of how 2 experienced scuba divers underestimated the dangers lurking in those caves, leading to a terrifying struggle for survival and a tragic loss of life. Richard Patton and Clark McConnell were confident divers working on their instructor certifications at Texas State University. Their teacher, Don Dibble, was as experienced as they come, a former Navy diver, rescue diver, and dive shop owner with decades of experience. Don knew the risks of diving better than most, and he hammered one point home to his students above all others: stay out of Jacob's Well. Just 30 minutes from campus, Jacob's Well had a reputation as a diver's graveyard. From the surface, it looked simple enough: a deep blue hole in an otherwise shallow river. Swimmers often free dive to touch the bottom, about 25 feet down, but that bottom is deceptive. In one corner, a gravel slope leads to a hidden underwater world of chambers and tight passages. Over the years, cave divers had mapped out 3 main chambers beneath Jacob's Well. The first 2 were mostly open water, but the third required squeezing through a tight passage. Beyond that, rumors swirled of a mysterious 4th chamber. The allure of the unknown proved irresistible to some divers, despite the obvious dangers. Don Dibble knew those dangers all too well. In 1979, he'd been called to help recover the bodies of 2 men who died trying to reach the 4th chamber. Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear had made it through a narrow 2-foot-wide tunnel, only to have a rock slide trap them inside. The recovery team couldn't even reach their bodies. Mark's remains washed out 2 years later, but Kent's body stayed in that chamber for 2 decades. Sick of the senseless loss of life, Don took matters into his own hands in 1980. He brought cement and rebar down to seal off the passage to the 4th chamber. But his efforts were short-lived. Within months, other divers had torn out his barricade, leaving a taunting note: "You can't keep us out." Don's warnings about Jacob's Well were meant to save lives. But for Richard and Clark, his stories of danger and near-death experiences only piqued their curiosity. They'd heard about Don's own brush with death in the 4th chamber, where he'd nearly run out of air after getting trapped by a gravel slide. The idea of exploring this forbidden cave system was too tempting to resist. What Richard and Clark didn't fully grasp was the massive difference between open water diving and cave diving. Their experience gave them confidence, but it was the wrong kind of confidence for the challenges they'd face. They didn't bring a safety line to mark their path. They weren't practiced in the frog kick technique used to avoid stirring up blinding silt. Most crucially, they didn't understand that in a cave, you can't simply follow your bubbles to the surface if you get disoriented. On the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, Richard and Clark slipped into the dark waters of Jacob's Well. By 8:30 p.m., they'd made it through the main well and first 2 chambers without issue. But as they approached the 3rd chamber, the true danger of their situation became clear. Once through that narrow passage, there would be no quick escape if something went wrong. Soon they found themselves face to face with the small hole leading to the fabled 4th chamber. To get through, they'd have to remove their air tanks and push them ahead separately while squeezing their bodies through the tiny opening. Richard went first, pushing through the tunnel while Clark waited. After a few moments, Clark started to remove his own tank to follow. Suddenly, Richard's face appeared in the opening, contorted in panic. He burst back through the hole with frightening force, scraping himself badly on the rocks. Clark realized with horror what had happened. Richard had no air tank. He was suffocating. Acting fast, Clark jammed his own regulator into Richard's mouth so he could breathe. Once Richard had taken a few desperate gulps of air, they started buddy breathing, taking turns breathing from the single tank as they began their escape from the cave. What followed was a harrowing test of patience, trust, and teamwork. To squeeze back through the narrow passage between chambers 3 and 2, they had to coordinate perfectly. One would take a breath, pass the regulator to the other, then hold their breath while moving through the tight space. All this while trying not to stir up silt or lose their way in the darkness. Against the odds, they made it. As they entered the first chamber, both men felt a surge of relief. They were close now. But in the pitch black of night, there was no guiding sunbeam to show them the way to the surface. The men moved slowly, still sharing the single air supply, feeling their way along the wall towards what they hoped was the exit. Suddenly, an awful sound stopped them cold. Their tank clanged hollowly against rock above them. Not only was the tank nearly empty, but somehow they'd hit a ceiling where there should have been open water. Frantically, they felt around, only to find walls closing in on all sides. The horrifying truth sank in. They were trapped in a dead end, with their air about to run out. Clark had just taken a long draw of air when he realized their mistake. They'd swum into a false chimney, a vertical shaft that looks like it leads to the surface, but is actually a dead end. In a desperate gamble, he pushed off the wall and swam back the way they'd come, hoping to find the real exit. After an agonizing 20-foot swim, he re-entered the main part of the first chamber. From there, it was another 25 feet up to the top of the chamber, then another 25 feet through the main well to the surface. On a single breath, Clark pushed himself to swim that grueling 75-foot ascent. When he finally broke the surface, Clark gasped in great lungfuls of air, his body shaking with relief and adrenaline. But that feeling of elation quickly gave way to horror as he realized Richard wasn't with him. His friend was still down there, and Clark knew with sickening certainty that he was out of time. Richard was dead. After waiting a few moments to see if Richard might somehow surface, Clark called the police. Within an hour, Don Dibble arrived on the scene for yet another rescue mission at Jacob's Well. When he learned it was 2 of his own students involved, he was stunned. They were expert divers, yes, but cave diving was a whole different ballgame. With the lower chambers silted out from the night's activity, they had to wait until morning to recover Richard's body. Don led the grim task, finding Richard's remains exactly where Clark had described, trapped in that deceptive false chimney. The tragedy of Richard and Clark's dive serves as a stark reminder of how even experienced divers can be caught off guard by the unique challenges of cave diving. Their confidence in their open water skills gave them a false sense of security in an environment that demands specialized knowledge and equipment. In the years since, steps have been taken to prevent further loss of life at Jacob's Well. The Hays County Parks Department now restricts access to the deeper parts of the cave system, with a grate placed at the 40-foot mark. All recreational scuba diving in the well is now prohibited. While estimates vary, it's believed that between 8 and 12 people have lost their lives diving in Jacob's Well over the years. Each death is a sobering reminder of the power and mystery of underwater cave systems. The allure of the unknown can be strong, but as Richard and Clark's story shows, it's crucial to respect the unique dangers of these environments and never let confidence outweigh proper training and equipment. Today, Jacob's Well stands as both a natural wonder and a somber memorial. Its crystal-clear waters still invite swimmers to cool off on hot Texas days. But for those who know its history, the seemingly peaceful pool holds a powerful lesson about the hidden dangers that can lurk just beneath the surface. Imagine plunging into pitch-black water, squeezing through underwater tunnels barely wider than your body, with nothing but a thin guideline connecting you to safety. Now, imagine doing this over half a mile deep inside a mountain, where no one has ever been before. For Martin Farr and Roger Solari, 2 young cave divers pushing the limits of exploration, this was the ultimate thrill. But on June 15, 1974, their quest for discovery in the Ogof Finnan Dew cave system would lead to a heart-stopping decision that would haunt one of them for the rest of his life. Martin Farr and Roger Solari were the kind of cave explorers who lived for the thrill of discovery. At just 23 and 26, they'd already spent years honing their skills in the UK's most challenging cave systems. In 1974, they set their sights on the Ogof Finnan Dew cave in South Wales, hoping to push beyond what other explorers had mapped. The cave was a beast, with twisting passages and water-filled tunnels called sumps. These sumps were no joke. You needed full scuba gear to get through them. Martin and Roger knew the risks, but the promise of uncharted territory was too tempting to resist. Their first attempt came in May. Roger was sidelined with a bum knee, so Martin went solo. It was a grueling journey, hauling diving gear through tight squeezes and boulder-choked passages. After nearly a mile of tough going, Martin reached the first of 3 known sumps. The first 2 sumps were relatively short dives, but the third was a different story. Martin swam 850 feet through the underwater tunnel before emerging in a new air chamber. He was thrilled, but knew he didn't have enough air to explore further. He'd have to come back with Roger and more gear. When June 15th rolled around, the duo was ready for their big push. They lugged 3 air tanks each through the cave's twisting maze. After diving through the first 2 sumps, they swapped to fresh tanks for the long third sump. Emerging on the other side, they felt that electric buzz of exploration as they hiked another 1,800 feet to the uncharted 4th sump. But as they prepped their gear, a strange mood settled over them. The excitement was still there, but now it was tinged with an unshakable sense of dread. They were so far from safety, with only their equipment and skills standing between them and disaster. Still, they pushed those feelings aside and slipped into the murky water. Roger took the lead, unwinding 400 feet of guideline as they swam. Martin followed with another 1,000 feet of line, ready to take over when Roger's ran out. They knew Roger would likely turn back first since his tanks were smaller, but they each had to make their own safety calls. At the 400-foot mark, Roger's line ran out. Martin could see his buddy was struggling with sinus pain, but Roger wasn't about to let that stop him. As Martin started laying his line, he made a fateful decision. He was breaking the rule of thirds, a cardinal rule of cave diving that says you should turn back when you've used a third of your air, but the lure of discovery was too strong. Martin pushed on another 100 feet before hitting a gravel wall. Thinking he might be near the end of the sump, he followed the wall up, hoping to find an air pocket. His depth gauge showed he was just 3 feet from the surface, but there was nothing but solid rock above. He knew he should turn back, but the path curved to the right. Maybe the air pocket was just around the bend. Another 30 feet, and Martin's hopes were dashed. No air pocket, just a dead end. As he turned back, he saw Roger near the top of the passage, looking panicked. Martin signaled that they needed to get out fast. Roger's face said it all. He might not have enough air to make the 500-foot swim back. Martin headed for the bottom of the passage, following their guideline out. But after just 130 feet, his tank ran dry. He switched to his reserve, doing quick mental math. He'd barely have enough to make it through this sump and the next. When he surfaced in the air chamber between sumps, the relief was overwhelming. But Roger still hadn't emerged. Minutes ticked by, then hours. Martin knew the terrible truth. Roger didn't have enough air to make it out. After an hour of agonizing waiting, Martin tugged on the guideline. It came loose, cut clean at the 430-foot mark. Roger must have had to cut it while switching tanks, maybe getting tangled in the process. In the panic to find air, he could have easily gotten turned around in the silty water. Martin faced a horrible choice. He barely had enough air to get himself out safely. There was no way he could search for Roger without putting his own life at risk. With a heavy heart, he began the long journey back to the surface, knowing he'd have to tell others what had happened. In the years that followed, Martin never broke the rule of thirds again. He continued diving, but the memory of that day haunted him. Despite extensive searches, Roger's body remained lost in the depths of Sump 4 for over a decade. It wasn't until 1986 that 2 other divers, Ian Rowland and Julian Walker, pushed beyond Martin's furthest point. At 720 feet into the sump, they made a grim discovery. Roger's body, still waiting in the darkness after 12 years. The dangers of recovery were too great, so Roger was left where he lay, a somber reminder of the cave's unforgiving nature. A year later, Ian Walker made one final push through Sump 4. He swam 875 feet through the tight underwater passage, passing Roger's resting place. At last, he found the elusive air pocket everyone had been seeking. But It was just a small chamber, a dead end with no connection to other cave systems. They named it Against All Odds Chamber, a fitting tribute to the explorers who risked everything to reach it. Today, the entrance to Ogof Fin Du is locked, open only to experienced cavers with special permission. A plaque near the entrance honors Roger Solari's memory, a reminder of the thin line between triumph and tragedy in the world of extreme exploration. The story of Martin and Roger serves as a stark warning to all who venture into the unknown. The thrill of discovery can be intoxicating, pushing us to take risks we know we shouldn't. But in the unforgiving world of cave diving, one small mistake can have fatal consequences. It's a lesson written in the dark waters of Sump 4, where Roger Solari made his final dive into history. William Coughlin's cave adventure turned into one of the worst caving incidents ever. What started as an exciting trip with friends on May 30th, 1993, ended in tragedy when he fell and cracked his head open. But that was just the beginning of his nightmare. Welcome to On the Edge, where tragic caving stories unfold and explore what went wrong. Let's dive in. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing nearly 230 pounds, William wasn't one to shy away from getting dirty or bruised. His love for nature and adventure led him to work for the Environmental Protection Agency. When his friend James suggested exploring caves, William jumped at the chance. They started small, diving into simple caves around their neighborhood with little gear. Their success boosted their confidence, and soon they were hungry for more. That's when they found a brochure for Buzzard Rouge Cave in Cave City, Kentucky. The cave offered 2 tours, a simple historic tour and a more challenging wild cave tour. The wild cave tour promised tight squeezes, sharp edges, and slick floors. Not for beginners. But William and James weren't scared off. In fact, the danger excited them. On Friday, May 28, 1993, William, James, and another friend, Kevin Feely, set off from Oak Brook, Illinois. After an 8-hour drive, they crashed for the night, eager to start their adventure. The Memorial Day weekend added to the festive atmosphere. Sunday rolled around, and the guys headed to Buzzard Rouge Cave. They met 4 other tourists there, all trying to access the cave. Before they could enter, they had to sign a release form. The form warned of dangers and freed the operators from any legal responsibility. It should have been a red flag, but William and James were too pumped to back out now. Kevin, however, decided to sit this one out. At 4:30 p.m., they entered the historic tour with guide David Hardin leading the way. It was easy, just as the brochure promised. But when they finished and prepared to enter the Wild Cave tour, things got weird. Hardin brought out another release form and asked for more money. They paid up and got 2 handheld flashlights. That's it. No helmets, no water, no climbing gear. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Hardin pointed to a narrow passageway and told them to stay close. William struggled from the start. His size made it hard to squeeze through tight spots. He groaned and moaned, picking up minor bruises along the way. But he pushed on, excited by each conquered obstacle. They reached a cavern halfway through the Wild Cave tour. Hardin told them they'd have to climb down a 30-foot pit using a cable ladder. No safety gear, just careful climbing. They made it down okay, but the next ladder was tougher. It led to extremely tight passageways and ended in the big room, the tour's final stop. William had a hard time with the second ladder. There was a V-shaped passage he had to squeeze through before continuing down. It was tough for everyone, but for William, it was hell. Still, he made it to the big room, greeted by cheers from the others. Hardin let them explore other passages around the big room. William and James were thrilled, feeling like real adventurers. But at 7 p.m., Hardin called them back. They were behind schedule and needed to start climbing out. The group was exhausted and asked for a break. Hardin said he'd go make a call on the surface and come back for them if they weren't out in 45 minutes. 40 minutes later, with no sign of Hardin, the group decided to leave on their own. But William couldn't make it up the ladder. He tried again and again, getting more frustrated each time. James sent 2 of the tourists to find Hardin. While they waited, William gave it another shot. This time, he lost his grip and fell several feet. He cracked his head on a rock on the way down, and again when he hit the bottom. Blood poured from the gash in his head. James and the others tried to stop the bleeding with a torn piece of cloth. When Hardin finally showed up, he was alone. No medical supplies, no help. James was furious, but Hardin insisted they try to haul William up the ladder. It was a terrible idea, but Hardin wouldn't budge. So James and Hardin came up with a plan. James would pull from above while Hardin pushed from below. They managed to get William up to the narrow V-shaped passage. This part was tricky. You had to crawl left into a narrow passageway, make a sharp drop, then contort your body before moving up again. William went in head first and made the left turn, but as he tried to make the drop, he got stuck upside down, one hand wedged between his stomach and the rock, the other behind his back. William was screaming in pain. Every attempt to move him hurt like hell. The cave's owner showed up, but, like Hardin, didn't want to cause a panic. They kept trying to free William, but nothing worked. His breathing got worse as the tunnel walls pressed in on him, and the pain in his head intensified from being upside down. Finally, they called for help. The Cave City Volunteer Fire Department arrived around 10:30 p.m., 3 hours after they were notified. By then, a crowd had gathered at the cave entrance, many talking about the infamous Floyd Collins incident that happened nearby in 1925. Rescuers treated William's head injury and gave him oxygen, but they faced two big problems. The cold cave temperature, 44 degrees, that could cause hypothermia, and Hardin being stuck on the other side of William. They sent food, blankets, and hot coffee to Hardin through a small opening. James stayed close, talking to William and trying to keep him calm. But around 1 a.m. on Monday, William stopped responding. The rescue team tried everything, but nothing worked. At 5 a.m., William was pronounced dead. It wasn't until 12:45 p.m. that rescuers finally freed William's body. The medical examiner said he died from suffocation, made worse by his head injury. Despite the release form, TMH was sued and charged. The tragic story of William Coughlin serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in even the most exciting adventures. Thanks for exploring this underground tragedy with me. For more caving stories, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next descent.